Some memories age with you, softening around the edges but never truly fading. They sit quietly in the corners of the heart, untouched by time, waiting for a single moment, a familiar road, a certain light, the whisper of an old song, to bring everything back with a force you never expect. And for Daniel Harper, that moment came on a late autumn afternoon when he drove back into the town he once shattered, the town he left behind with regret heavy enough to follow him for decades. As the highway narrowed into the old main road, and the familiar line of maple trees bent gently in the cool breeze, he felt something inside him tremble in a way he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't the same man who had left at 22. Life had carved lines on his face, taken people he loved, and handed him a kind of silence that only loss could create. But the moment he saw the faded sign that read "Welcome to Maplewood," it felt as if time moved backward, pulling him toward a life he thought he had buried forever. He slowed the car as he passed the places that once knew him: Benson's hardware store, the old community hall, the narrow footpath where teenagers used to gather before school dances. Everything looked older now, worn but familiar, like stepping into a photograph that had been left in the sun too long. And then, as he passed the little church on Willow Lane, the memory struck him so suddenly he had to stop the car. It was right there, 45 years ago, that he had slipped a simple silver ring onto a girl's hand and whispered a promise he had been too young to understand. Her name was Margaret Hayes, Maggie, and she had been the one steady light in his chaotic young life. But he broke that light with one reckless mistake, the kind that leaves a scar even after decades have passed. He stepped out of the car and leaned against the door, breathing in the familiar scent of wood smoke and autumn leaves. It felt impossible that everything could look the same when he himself felt so different. After Linda, his wife of 32 years, passed away, the world had become unbearably quiet. He had loved Linda dearly, but Maggie had been the first chapter of his heart, the kind that stays inked even when the rest of the story moves on. Returning now wasn't planned. It was something he felt drawn to after sorting through his late wife's belongings. In a small wooden box, he had found a photograph of himself at 18, arm around Maggie, both laughing under the old hay barn roof. Linda had known the story. She used to smile softly and say, "Some loves don't disappear, they just change shape." That photograph had been sitting at the bottom of the box for decades. Seeing it again was like hearing an unfinished song. As he walked toward the churchyard, he remembered the day everything broke. He had made a mistake, one terrible, thoughtless mistake born out of youth and insecurity. A rumor had reached Maggie, a confrontation followed, and Daniel, foolish and overwhelmed, didn't fight for her the way he should have. Instead, he left town the next morning, too ashamed to face her eyes. He told himself he'd come back someday, but life moved faster than he expected. College, work, marriage, children, responsibilities, and suddenly, decades had passed. Regret had grown roots inside him, but he learned to live around it. Until now. He walked down the familiar gravel path leading to Hayes' farm, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe he only wanted to see the place where she used to live. Maybe he wanted to know she was happy, that she had moved on. The sun hung low, casting a soft golden hue over the fields where they used to run barefoot in the summers. The old farmhouse came into view. Fresh paint now, a new fence, but the same porch swing that used to creak when Maggie swayed gently with a book in her lap. He stepped closer, unsure if he should keep going. He didn't plan on disturbing anyone. He just wanted to look at the past from a distance. And then the screen door opened. At first, he didn't recognize her. Time had changed her hair, turning the warm chestnut color into silver. But her posture, the gentle curve of her smile, the softness in her eyes, they all belonged to Maggie. She held the door frame lightly, as if steadying herself from the shock of seeing the ghost of her youth standing by her fence. "Daniel," her voice breathed out, barely louder than the wind. He felt every year, every regret, every unsaid apology press into his chest. "Hello, Maggie," he whispered, unable to steady his voice. She stepped down the porch slowly, as if afraid he might disappear. "I thought I'd imagined this moment too many times to ever trust it if it came true. I shouldn't have come without calling," he said quietly. "I just drove. I didn't know why." You came home, she replied softly. That's reason enough. He couldn't look at her without feeling the weight of all the years. Maggie, I hurt you. I was young and stupid. I've carried it for a lifetime. Her eyes softened, and she shook her head gently. You were a boy trying to be a man before you knew how. We both were. She paused, breath catching slightly. And life has hurt us in other ways too, hasn't it? Daniel nodded. Linda passed 8 months ago. Maggie's eyes filled with quiet sorrow. I'm so sorry, Daniel. Truly. A long pause stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of old memories learning how to breathe again. She motioned toward the porch. Would you like to come in? He followed her to the swing, the same one they had once sat on under summer stars. They didn't talk at first. They simply listened to the crickets, the rustling trees, the crackle of distant hearths lighting for the evening. Finally, she spoke, almost in a whisper. You know, I kept something. He turned to her, unsure what she meant. She lifted her left hand. And there it was. The silver ring he had given her at 18, worn, faintly scratched, but unmistakably the same. He stared at it, disbelief tightening his throat. You kept it. She nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the horizon. I told myself I'd take it off when I no longer loved the boy who gave it to me. Her smile trembled softly. But years passed. People came and went. And every time I thought about removing it, something inside me, something quiet, something stubborn, wouldn't let me. Daniel's voice broke. Maggie, I don't deserve that. She looked at him with the same warmth he remembered from youth. Love isn't about deserving. Sometimes it just stays. Even when life doesn't go the way we think it will. He exhaled shakily. I thought you married. I didn't, she answered softly. I had chances. Good men. Kind men. But no one felt right. She hesitated before adding, what about you? Were you happy? Linda was a good woman, he said gently. We had a life full of respect, friendship, children, but she knew a part of me had belonged to someone else first. She never hated it. She understood it. Maggie wiped a tear from her cheek. She sounds lovely. She was, he whispered. They fell quiet again, the sun sinking deeper, turning everything copper and soft. Near the edge of the porch, a small music player sat on a table. Maggie pressed play, and a familiar song filled the air. Their song, the old tune they used to dance to in her parents' barn during rainy afternoons. Hearing it now, after 45 years, felt like time itself had folded. Daniel offered his hand, unsure if it was too forward. But Maggie reached for it like she had been waiting her whole life. They stood together, slow and steady, swaying on the porch as the psalm carried their memories between them. They didn't move much, just enough for the world to feel quiet, safe, familiar again. I missed this, she whispered against his shoulder. He closed his eyes. I missed everything. They talked late into the night, sharing pieces of their lives, the joys, the losses, the choices that shaped who they became. But the conversations never felt rushed. They had spent a lifetime apart. They could afford to take their time now. Over the next few weeks, Daniel stayed in a small room at the Maplewood Inn. He and Maggie walked the old paths they used to wander as teenagers. They sat by the river where he first told her he loved her. They visited the abandoned barn where they shared their first kiss in a storm. Everything felt tender, unhurried, like rebuilding something carefully, respectfully, with hands that had learned the cost of time. He apologized one evening, his voice cracking softly. I'm sorry for breaking us back then. Maggie touched his arm gently. You didn't break us, Daniel. We just got lost. It happens. What matters is what we do when we find each other again. They rebuilt something slow and gentle, something that didn't try to pretend the years hadn't passed, but rather honored them. They laughed at their aches, held hands on sunset walks, talked about nothing and everything. For the first time in decades, Daniel felt at peace. Winter came softly to Maplewood, brushing the roofs with frost. One evening they sat by her fireplace, the glow casting a warm golden aura around her silver hair. Maggie leaned against him and whispered, Do you ever think life gives us two gifts? The one we think we want when we're young, and the one we truly understand when we're older. He nodded, squeezing her hand. And sometimes, if we're lucky, they're the same gift. A tear slipped down her cheek. I think we're lucky, Daniel. He kissed her forehead, letting silence say what words couldn't. Years later, whenever people in Maplewood spoke of Daniel and Maggie, they described them as two souls who found their way back to a love that had waited patiently, quietly, faithfully. They didn't have the whole future ahead of them, only the years that remained. But they filled those years with gentle mornings, warm cups of tea, shared sunsets, slow dances, and soft, steady companionship. Daniel often said he didn't return to Maplewood to reclaim the past. He returned to understand it, to make peace with it, and to hold the hand of the girl who wore his ring across half a lifetime. And in the quiet glow of later years, they learned something important, something that became the ending message of the story they lived. That love does not always arrive when we want it to, nor stay in the shape we expect. But if it's true, truly true, it waits. Not frozen in time, not untouched by life, but patient enough to meet us when we're finally ready.